Welcome to Warriors Watch. I am Danny LaRue, your host, and so happy to be with you for another episode. I thought about doing a podcast on Warriors Blazers and decided against it, and instead I wanted to do a mailbag. It's going to be a combination of Reddit, which has a lot of this are Warriors, and then some email questions and some Twitter questions using the hashtag Warriors Watch, which is a good way to get questions into me as well because it's not a frequently used hashtag for other stuff, so you can throw them in there. And as I usually try to, I will go kind of in order of upvoted and not, but if questions weave together and tie together, I will put them together because that's way easier to do. So by far the most upvoted question, and there are kind of two that are similar together, was from Winter Assassin R and then one from Robot Soar about Warriors Rockets. And so Winter Assassins was, how do you think a Warriors Rockets series, or how did you think one would go before the season started, and what do you think of it now? And my opinion of it hasn't really changed too much since then. The biggest shift that has happened has been on Houston's side, just that some of the, well, if questions with Chris Paul and James Harden fitting together and with some of their defensive stuff, those questions appear to be answered in the affirmative for Houston. So that is a risk mitigator in that way. And Houston has a couple of different advantages. I've been thinking about how I wanted to phrase this. A little bit of this will actually be in a roundtable we did for The Athletic about where Houston fits in relative to the other teams the Warriors have played. And of course, we don't know if either team's going to be full strength by then, but I'm treating it full strength. I think that's the only fair way to do it. And I believe that even right now, when they're going to get better adjusting to each other, the Rockets are better than where Cleveland was last year. And I think it's an open question to a point whether they're better than Cleveland was the year Cleveland won the title. Of course, there are two important parts of that. One is Cleveland was way better in that finals than they were in most of the rest of the season because LeBron was superhuman and Steph Curry had a sprained MCL. So that wasn't full strength versus full strength in and of itself. What the Rockets do well is they have some really talented isolation players. James Harden has been a monster this year. He's averaging 1.3 points per possession, which is ludicrous on isolations. He's around 1 last year. And the Warriors try to make teams that way. It's something that actually was a problem sometimes for them against Cleveland because Kyrie is phenomenal in isolation. And so you're trying to get that. The other thing that Houston does well is they have now a more varied offensive attack because they have two really capable ball handlers and they have good shooting around them, and the other players on their team know their places, and so they'll take the shots that are open to them, but they're not going to force it too much unless those are the shots that you're conceding. And they've known that the whole year. The other elements that they have is they have a sound defense. They have a lot of defenders that they can throw at Kevin Durant. They, of course, have James Harden, who is a negative defensively. And if they play Ryan Anderson, they have Ryan Anderson, who's a negative defensively. But as a collective group, they're playing strong defensive players overall. They have a versatile set. They do have two centers in Capella and Nene. But if the Warriors go small and those guys can't hang, they can go with PJ Tucker at center. They can go to some other unconventional lineups. And so if they're healthy, they can do that enough because they have three forwards in Ariza, Mbamute, and PJ Tucker who can all work there. And then their guard rotation is pretty much just Chris Paul, James Harden, and Eric Gordon. But those guys are awfully good. Those guys are all really good players. So Houston has a lot of strengths that the Warriors will tone down, and I think the Warriors, generally speaking, have done a nice job on James Harden. Incidentally, the Warriors' best defender right now on Harden is probably Kevin Durant, former teammates, of course, but also just because Durant can defend Harden differently than just about everybody in the league. Since he's so long, he can just stay back on Harden and get good contests without having the same possibility of getting reaches and getting foul calls. And so Durant in those lineups can do well, and you don't really want Durant on CP anyway, so it's not that big a deal. You know, you're not getting into that, and if he gets him on a switch, no biggie, you can do a good job. So you have that, and then it is a little bit hard in each circumstance. Like the Warriors are going to want to hide Steph. Not because he's nearly as bad a defender as Harden, but just because he's important offensively, and that's going to get into one of the other things I want to talk about. But because you don't want to make him work as hard, because that you have other people for that. He's going to be most of the time your fifth defender, and so you just put him in the best circumstances to succeed. And while the Rockets have guys that are not tough covers, you have to be a little bit diligent on them. And then Harden, what the Warriors have to do is they have to put him in positions where he has to make decisions, make him defend in space, and the Rockets do not have a place to hide him except for when the Warriors have Iguodala out there, and there are certain ways that the Warriors can attack that, and they have done that in the past and will continue to do it. But shifting from Patrick Beverley to CP is important, not because Chris Paul is a meaningfully better defender than Beverley, though I had him first team and Beverley second team last year, but because Chris Paul is so much more capable offensively, and he gives them another dimension there. So then the other part that I think is important to understand with this series is the centrality of Stephen Curry not getting in foul trouble. In the opening night this year, that was an issue. With a lot of the Warriors' losses when Curry has been on the floor, you can see this common thread of games that he missed time due to foul trouble. And the Rockets are very well situated to take advantage of that. I mean, James Harden is a foul-drawing maestro. Chris Paul is a foul-drawing maestro. And Curry, to a large extent, can't help himself. And so that is going to require diligence from the coaching staff's perspective, from Curry's perspective, and they don't have a replacement for Steph. The Warriors can't. I mean, there aren't many replacements for him that exist in the world. There isn't a Steph light, really, that you can get. And that's why I've been impressed that they've handled the Quinn Cook minutes and to a degree in the most recent game, the McCollum minutes and the Livingston minutes as well as they have, is the idea that they don't have a replacement for Stephen Curry. So you don't go in that direction. But the problem with that is when you're playing for high stakes, it's very, very different than in games like right now. So that will be a deciding factor. I could totally see a game or two in a potential series between these two teams swinging on that. And then the other thing that I think has changed this series from what I expected is, while I predicted before the season that it was going to be the 1-2 if they were going to be the 1-2, which would mean they'd be in the Western Conference Finals, I expected it to be the Warriors as 1 and Houston as 2. And of course, that is still very possible. I'd probably still say that it's more likely than not that the Warriors are the 1 seed, but it's way closer than I thought it would be just because Houston has been gangbusters this regular season. Even during the time when Chris Paul was out, they've been great as a regular season team, and it is completely plausible that they end up with the 1 seed. And so the Warriors, they haven't had to deal with that. And it will be a challenge for them if that's what's coming. And it changes the structure of the series. It changes travel. It changes so many things. And that increases Houston's likelihood of winning, not only because it's a home game 7, but just by getting the Warriors a little bit out of their comfort zone, those 2 games on the road to start a series, everything like that. So I would say that before the season, what I thought was the most likely kind of outcome, the way I would phrase it is, I would have predicted Warriors in 6 as the most likely outcome, then Warriors in 5 as second, and Warriors in 7 as the third most likely outcome. I would still say Warriors in 6 is most likely, but now I would go 7 over 5, and the idea that the Rockets have a better chance in that series, I still don't have them as the favorites, absolutely not, but they have a greater chance of doing it, and so that's how I see it right now. And the Rockets are also one of the few teams that has really existed during this time that has lineups that can do a good job on the Hamptons 5. And also, if Iguodala is lesser at that point than he was last year, if he's, physically, if he's not as good defensively, if he's not making shots, then they still haven't had anybody really rise up and be the guy that can handle the level of offense that Houston brings in those lineups. So if it's not the Hamptons 5, what 5 is it? And that question has not yet really been answered against a team as good as Rockets. If it's the first round series and it's against the Blazers or it's against the Jazz or whoever else, that's a different question. But against the Rockets, against the Cavs, maybe the Oklahoma City Thunder, if they can figure out their offense, those questions are going to be more important. And so we can wait on that because this time last year, for those of you who listened to Locked On Warriors, I said similar things about Iguodala. And then when Kevin Durant got hurt, when he sprained his MCL, Iguodala was phenomenal. He was great, whether it was that he was conserving injuries or conserving his energy or just was healthier or applying himself, whatever it was, he was way better. So I will give him the benefit of the doubt in some sorts between now and then, but I'm going to be skeptical about it. And so that can shift over the next 4 months, and if it does, then we have a very different conversation. But the Warriors are still the favorites. I don't think that much has changed, but the reason why it hasn't changed for me is because I believed in this Rockets team, and they have become something close to what I articulated during the offseason when I thought they were the biggest threat to the Warriors, and still believe it. And then kind of in Robot Source question, there's another part of this that I didn't get to, which is basically, is the Rockets improved defense for real? And my answer is, yeah, pretty much. I mean, it might not be this good. They had that game, for those of you who watched it, was intensely entertaining against the Pelicans where they were giving up a lot of easy shots. And that was a game where the Pelicans played without Anthony Davis. And Houston has a high defensive ceiling because they play a lot of good defensive players, and James Harden. But the execution is going to be a little bit of a challenge, especially if they're facing a team that requires switching. The Warriors can get them into some matchups that they really don't like. And we still have to see how James Harden and Chris Paul perform in a series against truly elite defenders and teams with versatile defenses. Because while I think Kevin Durant is the best defender on James Harden, they've done a good job on him, and they've faced Harden a lot over the last couple of years. That might actually end up being one of the biggest helps for the Warriors in this potential series, is that they know Chris Paul and James Harden exceedingly well. They played both of them in playoff series. They've played Chris Paul dozens of times in the regular season as a member of the Clippers as well. And that helps. And so the Rockets, we really have to see what they do when they get punched in the mouth, because they haven't played many games against teams like the Warriors either. And D'Antoni, while he has been an innovator and probably an underappreciated coach in terms of the way he has affected what the NBA is now, that does not mean that he has really proven his mettle in terms of playoff adjustments. And the Rockets also, they don't have as much to go up because they're already relying on something close to a playoff rotation. They're playing their main guys a lot. And generally, they're playing pretty intensely. I mean, Harden offensively can't do a whole heck of a lot more than he is right now. Whereas the Warriors are kind of they're not on autopilot, but they're coasting a little bit. You know, they know what they are. They know where they need to get to. And right now, the Rockets have been a better team than the Warriors so far this year. But the Rockets are basically at 9.5, and the Warriors are at like 6. So they can just ratchet it up, and they're the better team right now. So that is something that is worth considering. But their versatility defensively, the amount of guys they have that they can throw at the Warriors players is significant, and it's something entirely different. And I talked with Tom Haberstroh on Real Jam Radio this week about the idea that Cleveland just doesn't have anybody to guard Steph Curry, and that hasn't changed. The Rockets do. I mean, it's really mostly CP, but Chris Paul has done a nice job on Steph Curry in the past, including the 2015 playoffs, and he's still that guy. So it's more plausible for them than it is. And of course, they have a bunch of guys they can throw KD. And another thing, I forgot to mention this before, that would be a linchpin in a series like that if it happens, is how quickly the Warriors adjust to certain elements of what makes Houston special. So I've talked about this at various moments in time, and if this series happens, I'll probably write an entire piece about it. One of the mistakes that the Warriors have made a lot against the Rockets is putting Draymond Green on Ryan Anderson. And the reason why that's a mistake is Ryan Anderson is completely content just standing 28 feet from the basket and shooting if the opportunity presents itself. So Draymond knows his capability there. And so what that does is if you put Draymond on Ryan Anderson, he can't really be a help defender unless Anderson is involved in the primary action. And they can do that from time to time. But the Rockets know that if they can keep Draymond out of stuff, they'll be better off. And so try to put him on other guys, and also just try to get Ryan Anderson off the floor. While you could say their other players are better defensively, the sheer potential of getting one of the Warriors' better defensive players out of help position is worth it for the Warriors to try to get him out. So that's something to consider as well. The next thing, actually, I'm going to go to a Twitter question, which was pretty interesting. And so somebody but just asked me, and I like when people ask me this, they're just like, basically, what's going on with Chris Boucher? And Chris Boucher was the Warriors' other two-way contract. He was a really talented guy, played with Jordan Bell at Oregon, and was really their primary rim protector. Was there, he's not a traditional big in kind of the way also Jordan Bell is, and actually Boucher is a better shooter than Jordan Bell is. And it looked like their whole season was going to fall apart when he tore his ACL I think it was in March, but before the NCAA tournament. And Bell and numerous of the other guys, we're seeing those Oregon guys in the NBA right now. Dylan Brooks is having a nice year. They rallied and they had a nice run. I think they went to the Final Four. But Boucher tore his ACL, and the Warriors, he went undrafted, so the Warriors signed him into a two-way deal. And he's still recovering from his ACL. So what they asked was basically what's going on with it. So I did what I normally do when I run into a question like this and don't have a clear answer. I dug into seeing if anybody, any of the people with better ties had written anything. And when that didn't come through, I asked Raymond Ritter, the PR guru for the Golden State Warriors. And awesomely enough, he got back to me. he said that the training staff told him, because he had asked the training staff, that Boucher is making good progress, and he has been doing some on-court non-contact work. So that's, like shooting drills and things like that, maybe even some movement stuff, like walking through. But he hasn't done really anything that's like practice or contact work yet. But it is expected that he's going to get to that point, like 3-on-3, basic stuff, nothing too crazy in the near future. So I don't know what near future means. Training staffs are notoriously nebulous about this sort of thing, but that's new. That's not something that I think has been reported. I think that will be first here. I'll probably tweet about it at some point after this, just because it's good to give a little shine to the podcast. But yeah, that's news on Chris Boucher, and thanks to Raymond Ritter for sharing that with me and for the training staff for sharing that with him. Next question is from, I guess it's Schlez, and the question is, with the unknown extent for Zaza Pachulia's shoulder injury, what do you think is the earliest time we could see Damian Jones get significant minutes, like 5 to 10 minutes, and whether he'll be ready to play this season by the playoffs? So the biggest thing that is running against Damian Jones right now is the fact that the Warriors don't need him. Their threshold for contributions is incredibly high. I mean, we've seen what Jordan Bell is capable of, and he was even marginalized for too long, but he was marginalized for a little while because Pachulia and David West, and now Jordan Bell, Kevon Looney, those guys are ahead of them in the rotation. And remember also that the Warriors are going to need to pare that down even further once we get into the playoffs, because they're basically avoiding Draymond at center minutes other than the end of the second, end of the fourth if they're behind. So that will even tighten up. And with Jones, I mean, I talked before about how a big part of why Jordan Bell didn't play for a while was the idea of trust, and that, he's still learning the sets. He's still learning, getting adjusted to the speed and the power of NBA players. Damian Jones missed most of last year. He played some in the G League, but he was dealing with that triceps injury, which occurred before the draft, which is why he fell to the Warriors. And so if the circumstance presented itself where they needed Jones, I think they would be comfortable playing him that, 5 to 10 minutes, but he has to jump a lot of other people. So I would not expect it this year. And I said last year, and was, I don't know if it was right or wrong, that it would be a good calibrator for Jones for how much faith they had in him to see what resources they put into the center position. And unfortunately for Damian Jones, they got good players for cheap prices. I mean, Pachulia came back at basically the expected version. They didn't have to go into any exceptions for him. Then they got Jordan Bell with a bot draft pick. They got David West, and then eventually JaVale McGee for the minimum. So that's a pretty awesome deal. So, of course, if they could get something like that again next year, they'll do it. I mean, that's a worthwhile gamble to go on those guys. But they don't have to if the right people do not say yes. And that I wrote a piece for The Athletic about the possibility of the Warriors bringing back Kevon Looney. There are restrictions on that. Basically, they can bring him back, but he's unrestricted, and they can't pay him more than the $2.2 million or thereabouts in money that they declined on him. So who knows if he's going to come back, but that option is there. And so Jones is going to have to prove it. I would be surprised at this point if he didn't play in Summer League next year, and he can have an opportunity to prove it. The downside of that is he's still going to be at the mercy of supply, and because remember, Summer League doesn't start until a lot of the best players have already made their decisions. So they're probably not going to be saying no to people because Damian Jones has been doing so well. I mean, he can do it in camps and things like that. Like, they have a much better sense of how good he is than we do, but they can learn something in those settings, and so we'll have to see. So my answer is I don't expect to see it at all this year. I would say it's a reasonable shot next year, but he's still behind a bunch of people, and we don't know how many of those people are going to be on the team next year. So let's say 60-40, 70-30 that he gets that he starts the year with that chance next year. But remember, people want to play for this Golden State Warriors team. Like, it's going to be a part of this, and the center market is oversaturated this year, this coming offseason. I haven't written about this yet too much, but it's coming. That there will be a lot of centers, and there are not a lot of teams with cap space. That's going to come up later in this mailbag. So in those kind of circumstances, that means players are giving up less money to come to the Warriors than they would have in other years. If this was 2016, the bonanza, it was incredible that Pachulia and David West left as much money on the table as they did. If there's fewer teams that are offering these crazy amounts, and for a lot of these guys, they're going to be thinking more in the mid-level exception range. It's a whole lot easier to turn down $4 or $5 million to come to the Warriors for 2 than it is to turn down $10 million to come to the Warriors for 2. So there is a very real chance that they're going to get more good guys, whether it's holdovers or just new players. And so you can circle the people you like the most in your brain of like the targets and all that kind of stuff. But that runs against Damian Jones as well. So we'll have to see. But I haven't heard anything that would lead them to think Jones hasn't been good in the G League. He does when you watch him, when he has gotten opportunities like in the preseason, just the recognition and all that kind of stuff is going to take some time. But remember, that's, again, missing so much of last year. He didn't get to play in Summer League in 2016. He didn't get to play at the beginning of that season, so he hasn't really gotten the NBA-style reps. And the G League can help, but it's not everything. So I think they're open to it. They're receptive to it. They would love to be able to have that as a fallback, but they will be ready in case that doesn't happen because the stakes are too high for them to rely on something that they don't trust all the way. Question from Get the Red Out. Jordan Bell was a second-round pick, but his game fit perfectly into the Warriors system. If I made you the Warriors GM, went back in time, and gave you the 16th pick, would you select Bell? So that's interesting because you get to know what we know now, but you don't get to know what we know moving forward. And going from the mid-30s to 16 does open up a few players that I think are worthy of conversation. So the big one for me is OG Anunoby. Anunoby has been great. The reason he fell that far was because of an ACL injury he sustained at Indiana, and teams were just worried about how long it was going to be, whether he was going to make a full recovery, and he might not even be all the way back yet, but he's been really good for the Raptors. And what Anunoby brings that Bell does not is value at a position that is exceedingly hard to find. Anunoby is pretty much a straight small forward, and while he is not he doesn't fit straight into the offensive archetype of the Warriors, though he has been hitting his shots early. He's been hitting his shots way better than I expected, at least at this point in his career, maybe even overall. But remember, it's early in the season, and he didn't even start the beginning of the season because he was still coming back from the ACL. So that is a downside, that he would have to be, he's a different cog to fit in. But the upside is he's incredibly talented defensively. He has shown an ability to hit shots. He's more capable with the ball in his hands than I expected. And he plays a position of intense scarcity and intense value. And the Warriors, just like any other team, as good as their wings are, they're going to really need them in the future, both because Iguodala is going to age and because you just need them. And if the Warriors are going to start sliding some of these guys up more in position, so maybe playing Draymond more at the 5 in the playoffs, playing Durant more at the 4, maybe even a little bit the 5, we saw a smidge of that against the Blazers, then you need wings to make that happen. And Anunoby would be there. So he's one serious option. Kyle Kuzma has been a revelation offensively for the Lakers. A guy who's power forward sized who can drill threes is incredibly valuable. The Warriors know how to use guys like that. Semi Ojeleye has been a really intriguing switch defender for the Celtics, and he also has been hitting more shots than I expected, and he's built like a tank or a brick wall. So you're really looking at those guys, comparing them to Jordan Bell, and Bell has been really what they needed, and his recognition and athleticism is an incredibly valuable combination and something that you don't expect to fall that far. And he's still young enough, I believe he's 22, that you can expect for him to get better. Now, you don't expect the same thing for a 22-year-old in terms of improvement as you do for a 19-year-old or a 20-year-old. Like, I think Anunoby's 20 at this point. So it's different, and you can make the counter argument, because I think what this boils down to is Bell versus Anunoby. I think as great as Kuzma has been, I worry a little bit about where this is going, and when you looked at it, so far out of the realm for what he did at Utah. Not saying he won't continue to be very, very good, but if he's not this good, then that takes a step back. But so really what it comes down to between Anunoby and Bell is the idea of positional value and positional scarcity. And so Jordan Bell has been great. Jordan Bell has been what the Warriors need. He fits in with a lot of things, but there are two limitations that are a problem. One, they haven't had any sort of issue finding centers, and that means that you might not get another Jordan Bell, but you can get an 80% or an 85% Jordan Bell somewhat reasonably. Like, those guys exist, and drafts often have players like that. So yeah, you're losing out on that 15%, and Jordan Bell is a wonderful player, and he could be a very big part of some very, very successful teams. But the reasonable facsimile argument is important here. Anunoby it is exceedingly hard to find guys like that. The Warriors haven't really, I mean, they got Omri Caspi, which is impressive and amazing that they were able to get somebody as capable as he is for the minimum, but that's a one-year thing. You know, obviously if you're drafting a guy and you're getting the 16th pick, like the hypothetical here, then you get to have them for 4 years and then you get team control after that. So I would go with Anunoby, but the fact that Jordan Bell has made it that close is really, really impressive. I mean, there were basically 20 guys drafted between the pick that they're hypothetically giving me and Bell, and then plus every guy that went after Jordan Bell and went undrafted. And the fact that he's second and it's a close call is really, really impressive. And for those of you who remember, I was insanely high on OG Anunoby. I think I had him I didn't ever went past like 7, but I think he probably would have been like 10 on my board. And Bell was somebody I wasn't super familiar with because he went to Oregon, and while I watched UCLA a little bit last year, Oregon wasn't on my radar because I only have enough time with Dunked On and everything else to really focus on those top guys because I don't watch that much college basketball. It's more after the fact film analysis. So Bell has done a great job being behind one guy, and it's a judgment call is no small accomplishment, and it should be treated that way. The next question is from Musinger. Do you think that Omri Caspi needs to start getting more aggressive at shooting the three? Talked about how his game has been beneficial and he can help out. And my answer is yes. He can provide other value. He is surprisingly adept as a cutter and a passer. It was just not something he was asked to do very often in his various other stops, especially on the Kings. And he fits that like a glove. But he needs to be able to take and make, at the bare minimum, the threes that are clearly presented to him. And I still feel that he can do that. It also has been weird because like his free throw percentage, if you look at it, just the raw numbers, is okay. But it just doesn't look the same as it did before. So that's kind of another thing because free throws and three-pointers do kind of tie together. But as the question gets into, the bigger issue is not necessarily his capability there. It's just making sure he has the willingness, because being able to take threes and make them at a reasonable rate, because obviously if you're Marcus Smart and you're taking them and you're not good at them, then that brings its own problems. It forces teams to defend you differently. They have to close out harder. They have to stay closer to you. So that takes away help. It creates driving lanes, all those sorts of things. And Caspi needs to make sure that he shoots enough at the bare minimum so that he gets respected. And if he can do more than that and be successful, it's even better, because as I talked about with Draymond and Ryan Anderson, the more respect you get, the more spillover effects you have. Warriors fans know this better than any other fan base in the entire NBA, arguably in the history of the NBA, because of Stephen Curry. And while Steph is the extreme of extremes, you get where it goes from there. And so I want to keep an eye on what Caspi does there, and he can, to his credit, provide a lot of value even without being as aggressive in that way as I think he should be. But yes, the answer to the question is yes, it would really help. Next up are two different Patrick McCaw questions, but I'll answer them separately because they're very different questions. First one is from Ernest Silk, and it was, if you could redo the 2016 draft and McCaw and Brogdon were both still available, which one would the Warriors have picked and why? So it's interesting because he says, which one would they have picked? And I think the Warriors really liked McCaw. His potential was there to be just an impactful player in the idea that they wanted to be very active in terms of steals. And oftentimes when you're moving up, you are doing it kind of for a specific player. So that's where I think it would have gone. For me, the more interesting question is, knowing what we know now, which way would you have gone? And while Brogdon won Rookie of the Year last year in admittedly a very weak rookie class, 2016 draft class looks better because Ben Simmons is in it, but the rookie class that was eligible for Rookie of the Year was weaker. And with Brogdon, I think you would have to still go with him because he was just way better last year than McCaw was. He was a bigger part of what Milwaukee had to do. He shot 40% from three, something McCaw is doing right now, but didn't do over the full season of last year. And Brogdon did a nice job defensively. McCaw and Brogdon are very good defenders they're good defenders in different ways, but Brogdon's ability to shoulder that load and to do a good job in the playoffs, I thought he was underappreciated part of what Milwaukee did. One of the big differences between those two guys is age. Brogdon just turned 25 and McCaw is 22. And while that is not everything when it comes to players, it is a good calibrator for how much room somebody has to grow, because generally we think of a prime as being more late 20s. And so if you're closer to that, you're going to be there. And in terms of physical prime, I go back to a piece that Kevin Pelton wrote years ago, which is the idea that we often think about a player's prime as being like the combination of the physical and the mental. But really, a player's physical prime is right around when they come into the NBA. It's just that the mental part, the mental improvements outstep the physical decline. And you see this with things like rebound rate. The guys don't get better, generally speaking. Like the best rebounders, they have that energy and all that, and the bounce when they're younger, and then that wanes out, but skill and all that comes in. So I think the Warriors would have gone with McCaw. I don't know that. I haven't talked to Bob Myers about that. I don't even think he'd tell me the truth, even if he wanted to, because GMs don't do that while players are still in the league. Wouldn't want to hurt McCaw's feelings, hurt his reputation, all that kind of stuff. But I think that it would be a close call, even knowing what we know now. And Brogdon has been a little bit disappointing this year. McCaw hasn't had nearly the kind of shot that many of us hoped that he would have. But I still think that's kind of the way it would go. I would go with Brogdon, but it would be a tough decision. And part of it also is that Brogdon can just run an offense better at this point in his career than McCaw can. And the Warriors need other guys who can do that. So McCaw fits better with Curry, with Durant, that's sort of an equilibrium. But when Curry is hurt, when Durant is hurt, when you just want somebody out there who's a capable steward, especially if Iguodala starts aging a little bit more quickly, just to have somebody out there who's capable of creating, I think that Brogdon would be a really nice fit. So that's pretty much where I would go on that right now. But it is a closer question than I think some people would anticipate. So question from New York City 23. How do you see Patrick McCaw's 2018 offseason going? This season, his productivity has fluctuated, all that kind of stuff. And so people who subscribe to The Athletic will have had this for a long time. But I think there are a couple big parts of this that those who are less familiar with the restricted process and how it has changed in the new CBA need to know. And so McCaw can be retained by the Warriors. There's no issue with that due to what is called the Gilbert Arenas provision, named after when the Warriors lost Gilbert Arenas. And there's a whole chapter in my book on it. And basically what that means is no team can make an offer that the Warriors cannot match. And there are ways that can happen, but as a functional perspective, that is the limitation of basically the mid-level exception for 2 years, and then it can go up to the maximum. And one of the other new wrinkles to this now, which could be very helpful for the Warriors, is that theoretically, if McCaw got an offer like that, the team that matches, should they match, has the ability to, instead of having the contract follow that structure of small, and then big for however long it goes, they can instead put the average salary on their books for each year. And so for the Warriors, the good thing about that is the 2018-19 season is one before Klay Thompson and Draymond Green get raises off of where they're going to probably be. So it would still raise their luxury tax bill, but it would comparatively lower years that could be more expensive. So I think that would be a smart move should it happen. So that's one part of this. Second part is, I don't think there are going to be that many teams that are going to have big money offers for McCaw. There are not many teams that are going to have cap space. I've written about this for Sport News. Off the top of my head, I think it's about 8 teams that are going to have real cap space. And you could say, oh, well, they can offer, other things. And one thing to know is that if a team wants to make an offer for a player like him that has those escalating values because of the Arenas provision, what they have to have the ability to do is make that offer and have the average salary fit within an exception or whatever they're going to do. So if a team wants to do like 8 million, 15, even if they don't want to go full value or anything like that, they have to have more than the mid-level exceptions. So then you're talking about teams have to use cap space to sign him. And if teams have to use cap space to sign him, remember that restricted free agents cannot, the match window doesn't start until after the moratorium, which is about a week into free agency. So then what a team has to do is they have to be sitting on their space or just haven't had nobody come and say, okay, McCaw is going to be our guy. And it's possible. It's certainly possible. But there aren't that many teams with space. A lot of those are going to be spoken for relatively quickly. I mean, the Lakers are an obvious one here. And some of those teams aren't even necessarily going to use all of their space either on free agents or even necessarily this year. Because, let's say Chicago. Chicago, if they spend their money on multi-year contracts this year, then that's in 2018, then that's money they can't spend in 2019. Same kind of thing with the Brooklyn Nets. So my instinct is that what's going to happen with McCaw is he gets an offer around around the mid-level exception, not that spikes after that, but that is around the mid-level exception, maybe a little less than that, but in that range. So the non-taxpayer is around, I think it's around 8 million is the estimate for right now for next year, something like that. And while that's a lot of money, I think the Warriors are willing to take that on, especially if McCaw looks like he can be a part of the rotation. Let's say he's a 20 to 25 minute guy. With where the league is going and how hard it is to find those players, if they can get him for that price at 3 or 4 years, I think they should be really happy with it. And it's possible that his value gets depressed even further from there, just because there are a lot of other ways the teams can spend money. You know, they can take on other teams' bad contracts, things like that. But I think that's a fair calibrator for it, is somewhere in the like 6 to 8 million starting pay, and then it'll escalate, you know, the 5% raises from there. And if that's the offer, Warriors should be pretty dang happy about it. So that's really where I see it going right now. Plenty of time for it to change. It's a long season. McCaw will also presumably get the chance to prove himself in the playoffs. He will get that Warrior shine, but something that we've seen in recent years is that the Warrior shine, the championship shine, really matters more when teams have money to spend, when they have the ability to be reckless. Like Ian Clark didn't get that kind of a crazy offer, and while McCaw is a significantly better player right now and in the future than Ian Clark, you know, JaVale McGee didn't get that either. You are subject to the market conditions of your time. So that's something to consider. Question from Choban Radovan, whatever. I've been pretty amazed that the Warriors are having one of the best blocking seasons in the history of the NBA, although today's pace certainly helps that. It does. Still, they're the league leaders by a large margin. Is there anything different from the team defense perspective that you see from the Warriors, or is this pure talent? So, to give people a little bit of context, right now, as of Wednesday when I'm recording this, the Warriors are averaging 8.7 blocks per game, which is tied for the most in NBA history, which is really impressive. And while it is a fair point, as the questioner mentions, to talk about pace, we're still, you know, dealing with pace influence stuff from the 70s and 80s before the slowdown in the 90s, where, you know, guys like Oscar Robertson, they were playing at a faster pace than we are now, I believe. I would have to run more detailed numbers, but I believe they are. And the Warriors, of course, are playing at a faster pace than most teams. In terms of what's causing it, I attribute a lot of the difference to personnel. And the easiest place to start is with Kevin Durant replacing Harrison Barnes. Harrison Barnes was an underappreciated defender, but he wasn't a shot blocker. That really wasn't what he did. And Kevin Durant can do a lot of that. And with his length, something that holds with Draymond as well is that they surprise people. And one of the ways that guys get blocks in the modern NBA is just by not being able to anticipate. I mean, Durant is just super long. And so guys think they can get their shot off, and then he blocks it because they can't. Draymond, with his long wingspan, got these for years, especially actually before he became a starter. As a backup, he was getting blocks by not having the reputation when, you know, he obviously earned that later in his career. The other guys that have really incorporated that are Jordan Bell, who is an extremely active shot blocker, sometimes a little bit too active, a little bit overzealous, but that is still a strength for him. You only want him to get a little smarter with it, not change the exuberance that helps make him him. And also David West is having a crazy block season. Some of that, I think, is him knowing when to pick his spots more, and also just teams getting a little bit reckless, thinking that they can drive on him more than they can. So it's a combination, but from a scheme perspective, I'm not seeing anything different. I'm not seeing anything from the Warriors that is opening the door, except that they allow great players to make those kinds of plays, and now they have players that are better suited to do it. So I don't see anything from a scheme perspective, but it's a good question, and it's something that I'm going to keep watching this year. And from what I can tell, you can't get a comparative block percentage, which is actually the number you're looking for here. I don't think anybody has compiled those numbers yet, like combining pace, because really what you want is blocks as a proportion of possessions. And something else that'd be interesting, if anybody has the ability to do this, is it seems like the Warriors are blocking a lot of threes comparatively. I mean, threes are very hard to block, and so I would wonder what their 3-point block percentage is relative to some other teams. And yeah, we're shooting a lot more threes in the league now, so they might be lower than some other teams just because the sample size has gotten so much bigger. You know, teams are shooting as many threes as they are, then blocks are going to be a lower percentage. But I'd like to see it. It'd be interesting. But even in terms of pure number. Last question, I think, for right now is an interesting one, talking about how Kerr, after the Detroit game, said that the Warriors have had to become more methodical in their play since Stephen Curry's injury, play call sets, all that kind of stuff. And they talked about how they disagreed with it, but I agree with Steve Kerr. And there are two real elements to think about with this. One is on the offensive end, they're just running more plays. The Warriors have, on offense, generally speaking, have more of a system than plays. They do have some plays, like fist up and various things that they do. Fist up is the play that they often run at the end of quarters that involves screening and often getting a guy open in the corner. It's been Klay Thompson at moments. It's been Steph. It's been Nick Young recently, actually, before his concussion. And so they do have plays that they run. And, of course, they have after timeout plays. They have baseline out of bounds plays, all that kind of stuff. But a lot of what they do is more reading based on context and ball movement and player movement, that sort of thing. They have been more rigid since Steph Curry was out of the game, partially because they have to be. I mean, the Warriors are able to generate looks with their system because they have elite players and they have guys who can make amazing reads. And when you replace Steph Curry with Quinn Cook, I mean, he's just not as good at that, and he doesn't have as many skills to take advantage of those circumstances. Defensively, I think, is actually the underappreciated part that this has really changed, is that it's not as much that they're sticking to the system, it's that they know that they have to bring higher effort and understanding that certain elements of freelancing and just getting back in, it's freelancing they can't do, and they have to be better at getting back in transition defense because the margins are just that much tighter. And in the roundtable that it just came out for The Athletic, something I talked about is that the Warriors have gotten better defensively this year, obviously, since where they were at the start of the year when they were loosey-goosey relative to them. But they've still been bad at getting back in transition. And they've been the second best half-court defense per possession in the league, but they aren't defending in the half-court as much as most other teams because they're not getting back enough. And some of that is the Warriors produce a different set of opportunities because they shoot a lot of threes, certain things that allow for some fast breaks. They also have still been turning the ball over more than they should. So you have all that running together, and I think they've done a more concerted job. And I would say that it's fair to count that as methodical. It's a little different compared to the offense, but I would count it. So I think Kerr is fair with that assessment. And it's something to watch, though, is that the Warriors, Draymond has talked about this, David West has talked about this. I haven't heard Durant talk about it, but I'm sure he knows it, and of course Iguodala does too, is that the Warriors, to a man, know that they are a different team without Stephen Curry, and broadly speaking, I think they embrace that challenge. They just know that they're different. You can't succeed in the same ways, you can fail in different ways, and so their identity has to shift, and so they have embraced that, and not all of that falls under the methodical umbrella, but self-identification and all of that is exceedingly important. And these games, the fact that they were able to win the first 3 games without Steph, I would say they're significant favorites against the Mavericks, though Dallas can pull games out early. They just beat the Spurs on Tuesday, so they can win games like that. But the fact that they can get that without Steph, and they could easily beat the Lakers if Steph can't play in that game too. And so we'll see when he comes back. But the fact that they've been able to keep their heads above water is a testament to their existing talent and is also a testament to the fact that the Warriors can win in other ways. And they've been spectacular defensively since Steph was out. And that's enough for now. There are still more good questions. I plan on incorporating those in future episodes, either mailbag only episodes, or maybe what I'm thinking about doing is when I have some time, Thursday, Friday, something like that, just recording the answers to that and then maybe incorporating that in something next week, because a lot of the good stuff that's left is not time sensitive. So maybe if I have a 20-minute game recap with somebody next week, I can add that in and make it a beefier episode. And if you have any feedback on that, like whether you'd like, let's say I have 20 minutes more of this content, if you'd like that as a separate episode, if you'd like that as something else, just let me know. That is the easiest way. This is a very, very free-form show, and your input is exceedingly important to how I want to do it because I want everybody to be happy. So DannyLaRueNBA@gmail.com is the best way to do it, because if you write an email, it pops up in my inbox. Things get lost on Twitter all the time. So do that. If you want to take the time to do it, I will take the time to read it. I might not respond. I want to, but I might not because I'm busy. But I read everything. If that kind of stuff comes in, I have a special kind of like alert thingy on it, and I go through it that way. So that's a great thing that you can do to help out, to help me out and to make this the best show it can be. If you want to support the show, you can leave a rating, leave a review on the podcast player of your choosing. It's great if it's iTunes, totally fine if it's not. You can also subscribe, download every episode for a show that comes out sporadically like this does. It is a great thing that you can do. You can also check out my other work. Real GM Radio is my NBA podcast, Dunked On with Nate Duncan, which is daily, and we have a lot of fun doing that. Twitter NBA show, we're doing one on Wednesday night, not on the Warriors, but as many of you know, we will do the Warriors in the future. So that's basically, it's like you're watching the game with us. We're providing commentary. It's an alternate commentary track for the game, and we're doing Paul George's return game to Indiana, so OKC, Indiana, and then as much as we can handle of Charlotte and Houston, which is the second game. And we do that at least once a week and really enjoy it. And then my writing work, The Athletic, Real GM, Sporting News, lots of stuff going on right now. I actually have a backlog of pieces that are written but have not yet been published because of some process things that are being worked on. Not with The Athletic. That's my other NBA stuff. Athletic, we're right on pace. I actually have one thing that we're waiting on, but there's a different reason for that. So going through all that, if you have anything that you'd like for me to discuss on the show, whether it's a mailbag question or not, that's another thing you can send in feedback. And I really do appreciate that. It's been something that has helped make this show better and that will continue to do it. So thank you to everybody for the questions on Reddit, on email, in Twitter using the hashtag WarriorsWatch. Thank you for listening. Take care and make it a great day.